Reborn, my fiancé took the fall for my stepsister and landed in death row. I didn't use my father's amulet to save him. Play the full story in one go. Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. The exciting story begins right now. The stench and bone-chilling cold of the dilapidated woodshed still seemed to cling to my very marrow. Sister, do you really think that by surrendering the iron certificate, he would be grateful for your kindness? It was merely your own stupidity that severed the Emperor's last shred of consideration for the general's mansion. Now, you are less than a stray dog in this capital. What face do you have left to cling to life? Yun Xinshuang's delicate laughter and He Qingyun's cold, contemptuous gaze were like poisoned blades, carving away my flesh and blood inch by inch in my past life. The man I thought was my beloved, and the kind mother and sister I trusted, had conspired to embezzle my birth mother's dowry, swindled the entire fortune of the general's mansion, and finally stepped over my bones to achieve their meteoric rise. I drew my final breath filled with a heart full of bitter regret and resentment. I hated them for their cruelty, but I hated myself even more for being so muddled, weak, and easily trampled upon. Bang! The sudden, sharp sound of a door being flung open jolted me violently from that suffocating nightmare. I gasped for air, my nightgown drenched in cold sweat. There was no dilapidated woodshed, no brutal beatings raining down on my body. Instead, what met my eyes was a canopy bed draped with autumn leaf-colored soft mist silk. This was my maiden chamber in the general's mansion. Before I could even process the ecstatic realization of my rebirth, the shrill and affected wailing of my stepmother, Lady Lu, drifted in from outside. Zhiyi, my daughter, come out quickly! Something terrible has happened. Qingyun has been taken away by the officials from the Court of Judicial Review. This single cry instantly pulled my memories back to that turning point of no return. It was on this very day that my fiancé, He Qingyun, was thrown into the imperial prison for his involvement in a homicide at a villa in the capital's suburbs. In my past life, it was right here in front of this door that I lost my composure. Overwhelmed by the weeping of Madame Lu and her daughter, Madame Lu invoked the so-called bond between betrothed couples, using morality and reputation to corner me. She forced me to present the Iron Pledge, a relic from the late emperor that my father had traded his life for, to the Court of Judicial Review to bail He Qingyun out. Only later did I learn that the commoner beaten to death was the youngest grandson of old Master Qi, a renowned scholar with students all over the empire. The person who had actually been arrogant and willful at the villa, torturing and killing an innocent soul, was not He Qingyun at all, but my dear stepsister, Yun Xinshuang. He Qingyun had long been involved with her. To protect Yun Xinshuang and to secure the connections within the general's mansion promised by Madame Lu, he had willingly stepped forward to take the blame. By surrendering the iron certificate, I not only cleared the names of that illicit pair but also incensed the emperor, completely exhausting the last of the imperial family's goodwill toward my late father, General Yun. In this life, I will never repeat the same mistake. I draped a moon-white cloak over my shoulders and pushed open the door. The biting wind, laced with flecks of snow, rushed against my face, instantly clearing my clouded mind. In the courtyard, Lady Lu was wailing into her handkerchief, while Yun Xinshuang huddled by her side. Though she too kept her head down and sobbed, I caught the unmistakable flicker of guilt and panic hidden deep within her eyes at a single glance. Zhiyi, seeing me come out, Madame Lu immediately stepped forward to grab my hand, but I sidestepped to avoid her. Her hand froze in midair, and a flicker of shock crossed her eyes. She clearly hadn't expected that I, who had always been gentle and submissive, would be so cold today. Mother, what sort of decorum is this? Weeping and making a scene in your daughter's courtyard so early in the morning? I smoothed my cuffs, my voice steady and devoid of any ripple of emotion. Madame Lu forced out a few more tears and said urgently, "How can we care about decorum now? Qingyun has been embroiled in a murder case, and the Vice Minister of the Court of Judicial Review personally led men to haul him off to the imperial prison. Zhiyi, he is your future husband. If he is branded a murderer, your entire life will be ruined. Didn't your father leave behind a Danshu Taekwon iron certificate of immunity? Quick, take it out, and we shall go to the prison to get him out right now. Look at her. How desperate this face is. Every sentence invokes my reputation, and every word is a calculation. I stood on the steps, looking down at the mother and daughter, my gaze cutting across Yan Xinchuang's pale face like a blade. Does mother know exactly who it was that He Qingyun beat to death? Madame Lu froze, instinctively replying, just some commoner who trespassed into the villa. A commoner? I let out a cold laugh, the crisp sound particularly piercing in the silence of the bitter winter. That so-called commoner was the long-lost grandson of the great scholar, Elder Qi. Elder Qi's students and associates are spread throughout the imperial court, and this matter has already reached the emperor's ears, inciting his thunderous rage. Mother, you ask me to use the death-exempt metal to save him. Do you feel that our general's mansion doesn't have enough kin to fill a mass execution? As soon as these words were spoken, Madame Lu's face turned deathly pale, and she stumbled back half a step. Yun Xinchuang, hiding behind her, swayed as if she might collapse. She bit her lower lip hard, her breathing becoming erratic with sheer terror. How could this be? Madame Lu swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain calm. Regardless of who it was, Qingyun's actions were unintentional. Zhiyi, he is your betrothed husband. Do you have the heart to watch him suffer under torture in prison? As long as you hand over the iron certificate, the emperor will surely show leniency for the sake of your father's merit in the founding of the dynasty. Mother, watch your words. I suddenly raised my voice, rebuking her sharply. This shout carried the inherent ferocity of a general's daughter, startling the old women and maidservants in the courtyard into kneeling all at once. My father spent his life on the battlefield, earning this iron certificate through a body full of scars. That is a manifestation of imperial grace, meant to protect the Yun family bloodline. What kind of thing is He Qingyun? A poor scholar relying on our general's mansion for charity, who dares to treat human life with such disregard in the capital before even being married. He simply has no respect for the law. Does such a cruel and arrogant scoundrel deserve to be traded for my father's life? I stared intently into Yan Xinchuang's eyes, which were trembling like leaves in the wind, and said word by word, a prince who commits a crime shall be punished like a commoner. If he is innocent, Lord Huiyuan of the Court of Judicial Review is impartial and will naturally grant him justice. If he truly committed the crime of torture and murder, then he deserves to die. This marriage is cancelled as of today. The Yun family will never have a murderer as a son-in-law. Sister! Yun Xinchuang finally couldn't hold it back any longer. She snapped her head up, her voice sharp and cracking. How can you be so heartless? He will die in prison, whether he lives or dies. What does it have to do with me? I looked coldly at her face, which was distorted by extreme fear. Why does my younger sister seem more heartbroken than I? His actual fiancé? Could it be that he holds some leverage over you, and you're afraid that under the brutal torture of the Court of Judicial Review, he might start naming names? Yun Xinchuang reacted like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. She shuddered violently and lowered her head in a panic, stammering, I was just worried for you. Sister, I am not worried. I flicked away a non-existent speck of dust from my lapel, my tone chilling to the bone. The Court of Judicial Review has 72 types of torture instruments. I wonder how many of them young Master He, with those hands meant for holding a brush, can endure. Heaven's sins may be forgiven, but one's own sins are inescapable. Mother, sister, please leave. From this day forward, I shall close my doors to transcribe scriptures and pray for my late father's soul. No one is permitted to set foot in my courtyard. With that, I stopped looking at the mother and daughter's colorful expressions, turned back to my room, and slammed the door shut. Outside the door, Lu's suppressed curses and Yan Xinchuang's sobs intertwined. I leaned against the door panel and let out a long, heavy breath of stagnant air. This is only the beginning. The blood debts you owed me in my previous life, and the Yun family foundation you usurped in this life, I will personally reclaim every bit of it, in full. On the third day of He Qingyun's imprisonment, the news coming out of the court of state ceremonies grew increasingly dire. I heard that old Master Qi's disciples had jointly submitted a memorial demanding severe punishment for the murderer. He Qingyun had already been subjected to the finger screws twice in prison, leaving him half dead. Mrs. Lu was as anxious as an ant on a hot griddle. frantically pulling strings and sending silver everywhere. But when a wall starts to crumble, everyone gives it a push. Who would dare to offend a great scholar at such a critical juncture? As for me, I turned a deaf ear to the life and death situation in the imperial prison. I simply sat in the grand armchair in the main hall, leisurely brushing away the floating tea leaves in my cup. On the red sandalwood desk before me lay the neatly stacked inventory of the dowry left by my biological mother, along with the ledgers I had ordered my confidante, Nanny Wang, to forcibly seize from the accounting room over the past few days. Eldest Miss, over the last few years, under the guise of safekeeping, the madam has transferred 6 of the late madam's most prosperous shops into her nephew's name. More than half of those sets of imperial bestowed jewelry and antiques in the storehouse have also been moved into the second Mrs. courtyard. Nanny Wang pointed at the discrepancies in the accounts, her voice suppressed with resentment. In my past life, I had believed Mrs. Lu's hypocritical rhetoric about seniority and order and not flaunting one's wealth, allowing her to manage my mother's dowry. The result was being bled dry by that mother and daughter to fund He Qingyun's official career. Go, invite the madam and the second young lady here. I set down my teacup, the porcelain clinking with a sharp snap. Take a few coursework nannies with you. If they claim to be unwell, have a physician go directly to their courtyard to see them. In any case, they must be brought to the main hall today. Half an incense stick's time later, Lady Lu was brought in, half invited and half forced. Yun Xinshuang followed closely behind, the dark circles under her eyes making it clear that she had been losing sleep over He Qingyun's situation these past few days. Yun Zhiyi, what on earth do you think you're doing? Upon seeing the scene I had set, Lady Lu pointed a finger at my nose and scolded me in a fit of rage. Your fiancé is suffering in prison, and it's one thing that you haven't gone to pull strings for him, but now that the general's mansion is facing such a crisis, you're actually making a scene at home. Do you still have any respect for me as your mother? I didn't even bother to stand up and greet her. Instead, I slammed the thick stack of account books down at Lady Lu's feet and said coldly, Mother must be joking. It is precisely to resolve the troubles of our general's mansion that I have come today to clean house. Why don't you take a look at these accounts first and explain to me why, of the 120 crates of dowry my biological mother brought with her, only a pile of moldy fabric and empty shells remain in the storehouse? Mrs. Lu's expression shifted instantly, her eyes darting away subconsciously, yet she remained stubbornly defiant. What? What does an unmarried girl like you know about accounting? Do you have any idea how much the household's expenses have cost all these years? Your father passed away early. If I didn't repurpose some funds to supplement the communal accounts, was the whole family supposed to live on thin air? A fine way to supplement the communal accounts. Indeed. I pulled a yellow pawn ticket from my sleeve and tapped it lightly on the table. Then perhaps Mother can explain why the set of ruby and kingfisher feather hair ornaments, bestowed upon my birth mother by the late emperor, appeared in the dead pledge ledgers of the Shuini pawn shop in the south of the city? And why was it Chuier, my younger sister's personal maid, who exchanged that set for 3,000 taels of silver notes? As soon as these words were spoken, Yun Xinshuang, who had been twisting her handkerchief and feigning pity, snapped her head up, her eyes widening in terror. You're lying. I didn't! Yun Xinshuang shrieked, though her voice trembled violently. I stood up and pressed forward until I was right in front of her, my gaze burning like torches. Nothing? The appraiser from Shuini Pawn Shop is waiting in the side hall right now. Shall I call him in for a confrontation? Or perhaps, sister, you would prefer to go to the prefectural governor's court yourself to explain how many years of imprisonment the great law mandates for a successor wife embezzling the original wife's private property, and a nephew stealing his legal mother's dowry? Madame Lu panicked and grabbed my sleeve. Zhiyi, we are all one family. Why must you speak so harshly? Schwanger was just momentarily confused. She simply took a fancy to a few pieces of jewelry. Just momentarily confused and took a fancy to a few pieces of jewelry? I violently shook off Madame Lu's hand, my cold laughter echoing through the main hall. Mother, don't be in such a hurry to make excuses for her. I've investigated. After those 3,000 taels of silver notes were cashed, they didn't go into my sister's private treasury. Instead, they were used to purchase a secluded villa at Sunset Mountain in the suburbs. How coincidental that it is the very same place where He Qingyun has now committed murder. These words were like a sudden clap of thunder, instantly shattering the last remnants of the facade maintained by Madame Lu and her daughter. Mrs. Lu turned to look at Yan Xinchuang in disbelief, her lips trembling, unable to speak. Greedy and ruthless as she was, she never imagined that her daughter, who had always seemed so well-behaved, would dare to secretly use her elder sister's dowry to support her elder sister's fiancé. Sister, you're framing me. Yan Xinchuang's face was as pale as paper, her body swaying as if she might collapse. Yet she still made a final struggle. That villa. Brother, he rented it himself. What does it have to do with me? Still calling him brother he, at a time like this? My eyes were filled with contempt and mockery as I leaned in close to her ear, lowering my voice. In the hidden compartment of the villa's study, there is still a chemise you hand-embroidered with mandarin ducks, along with those sappy poems you wrote expressing your undying love. My dear sister, you used my mother's dowry to keep my fiancé. When the two of you were rolling in the sheets at that villa, did you ever think this day would come? Yan Xinchuang's legs gave way, and she slumped directly onto the ground, covering her face tightly as she finally broke down into hysterical sobs. Mrs. Lu looked at her daughter on the ground, then at the evidence clutched in my hand, finally realizing that the tide had turned. Her pride and joy, her daughter, had not only engaged in a clandestine affair with her future brother-in-law but had also become entangled in a massive criminal case. I summoned you here today for only two things. I turned and walked back to the seat of honor. Looking down at the mother and daughter from above, my voice as cold and hard as iron. First, within 3 days, you will replenish my biological mother's dowry in full, including interest. If it is short by even a single copper, I will take the account books and pawn tickets to strike the Denguen drum at the capital prefecture, letting the entire capital see the fine methods of the Yun family's stepmother. Second, I am officially breaking off the engagement with He Qingyun. From this day forward, whether he lives or dies, or which lover he implicates to share his guilt, it will have absolutely nothing to do with me. Yun Zhiyi, you are so heartless. Mrs. Lu collapsed into her chair, her finger pointing at me, shaking like a sieve. I looked at her, a trace of the icy coldness lingering from my past life rising in my eyes. No, this is merely the beginning. When the officers from the Court of Judicial Review broke through the gates of the general's manor, Yan Xinchuang was trembling, huddled in Lady Lu's arms. Second, Miss Yun, He Qingyun has already confessed in court that you personally committed the murder at the villa in the capital's outskirts. Lord Hu has ordered your immediate summons for a cross-examination. The sword-bearing officer spoke expressionlessly, the iron chains clashing in the cold wind with a chilling, crisp sound. Lady Lu's legs went weak, nearly causing her to collapse. She shielded her daughter fiercely and screamed, "Absurd! My daughter is a pure and innocent young lady of a noble house. How could she possibly kill someone? That man surnamed He must have broken under torture and is biting at random." Sitting in a round-backed chair under the corridor, I watched the unsightly display of this mother and daughter with cold eyes. I spoke calmly. Whether it is a random accusation will be known once she stands in court. Lord Hu Yuan, the chief of the Court of Judicial Review, is divine in his judgment. If mother continues to obstruct the officers, it will be considered contempt of court. Someone, come and assist the second miss with her veiled hat, and escort her to go with the officers. Yan Xinchuang screamed and refused to leave, but she was forcibly fitted with a white gauze veiled hat by several sturdy female servants and half-dragged, half-carried into the carriage. As the eldest daughter of the Yun family and He Qingyun's nominal ex-fiancé, I naturally had to accompany them to observe the proceedings to prove the Yun family's innocence. The main hall of the Court of Judicial Review was solemn and majestic, with bailiffs on both sides holding ceremonial staves, exuding an intimidating pressure. Sitting high beneath the plaque inscribed with clear as a mirror was none other than Hu Yuan, the chief minister of the Court of Judicial Review, dressed in crimson official robes. His face was as cold and stern as if covered in frost. He merely toyed with the gavel in his hand absent-mindedly, yet it rendered the entire courtroom so silent that a falling needle could be heard. "Bring in the major criminal, He Qingyun," Hu Yuan said in a low but resonant voice. Soon, a bloody, mangled figure was dragged forward, sitting upright in the observer's chair. I looked at He Qingyun's wretched state, yet not a single ripple of emotion stirred in my heart. The beast from my past life, who had climbed his way up using my flesh and blood, now had fingers dripping with blood and could not even stand steadily, slumped on the green brick floor like a dead dog. He could not endure the 72 instruments of torture at the Court of Judicial Review and finally confessed. All that talk of deep affection and loyalty turned out to be nothing but a joke in the face of the finger-crushing racks. He Qingyun struggled to lift his head. Through the slits of his swollen eyes, he caught sight of Yun Xinshuang, who was kneeling nearby wearing a veiled hat. A sudden spark of hope burst from his deathly gray eyes, and he cried out in a hoarse voice, "Shuang'er, Shuang'er, you've finally come. Tell Lord Hu quickly, it was you who accidentally killed that page boy, not me. Didn't your mother promise to bring the iron certificate of immunity to save us? Where is the certificate?" As soon as these words were spoken, the commoners watching outside the hall erupted into an uproar. Who could have imagined that this scholar from a humble background had not only committed murder but was also entangled in an affair with the second young lady of the general's mansion? Yun Xinshuang trembled all over. Though I could not see her face through the veil, I could sense her extreme terror from her white-knuckled grip on the hem of her skirt. She knew full well that once she confessed to this crime, under the pressure from the great Confucian scholars, disciples, there would be no way out but death. "You, what nonsense are you talking about?" Yun Xinshuang recoiled violently, her voice trembling with a sob as if she had suffered a monumental injustice. "Young Master He, you are my elder sister's fiancé. I have had no dealings with you whatsoever. How could you fabricate such lies to defile a woman's reputation just to exonerate yourself?" He Qingyun froze. He seemed unable to believe that this woman, who usually nestled in his arms whispering sweet nothings and vowing to stay with him forever, could be so cold-blooded as to turn on him now, severing all ties between them so completely. No dealings? He Qingyun's hope instantly curdled into a frantic rage. Finding strength from some unknown source, he struggled violently to lung forward. Even as the bailiffs pinned him down firmly, he howled hysterically, "You treacherous woman! That villa at Luoxia Mountain in the capital's outskirts, you bought it with your elder sister's dowry specifically for our secret trysts. That day, just because that old man's grandson accidentally dirtied your shoe brocade skirt, you flew into a rage and ordered the servants to beat him to death. How dare you claim now that we have no dealings? Utter nonsense!" Yun Xinshuang shrieked, tearing off her veiled hat to reveal a face as pale as paper. Drenched in tears, she turned toward Hu Yuan on the high bench and kowtowed heavily. "Lord Hua, please see the truth. This servant girl is being wronged. He Qingyun clearly coveted the power of our general's estate. When he failed to seduce me, he harbored a grudge. He rented that villa himself, and he was the one who killed the boy. It has absolutely nothing to do with me." "What a fine way to say it has nothing to do with you." He Qingyun laughed out of extreme rage, his voice hoarse and shrill. "Yun Xinshuang, do you really think the Court of Judicial Review is blind? Do you think burning those sappy poems means there's no evidence left? I'm telling you, I still have the pawn ticket from when your personal maid, Chui'er, sold your ruby headpiece at Shuani pawn shop, as well as the mandarin duck bodice you embroidered with your own name. They are hidden right under the floorboards of the Earth classroom at the South City Inn. My lord, send your men to search. One look and you will know." Upon hearing the word bodice, Yun Xinshuang's eyes rolled back, and her entire body went limp, collapsing onto the ground like a pile of mud. In her wildest dreams, she never imagined that He Qingyun, this utterly hypocritical villain, would keep such lethal leverage against her even while they were in the throes of passion. You heartless beast." Yun Xinshuang completely tore away her usual facade of dignified fragility, pointing at He Qingyun and cursing like a shrew. "If you hadn't seduced me with your sweet talk, why would I have stolen money from my family to support you? You were the one who held her down. You were the one who handed me the whip, and now you're pushing all the blame onto a weak woman like me? May you die a miserable death. You are the one who is arrogant, domineering, and treats human life like grass. It is you who will die a miserable death." In the courtroom, the illicit lovers who had once sworn eternal vows were now like two rabid dogs. biting and tearing at each other in a grotesque display of desperation, each wishing they could swallow the other alive just to survive. Asterisk slap. Asterisk Hui Yuan slammed the gavel down heavily, the crisp crack cutting through the filth and vitriol filling the hall. His gaze, cold and sharp as a blade, swept over the two people on the floor as he said chillingly, "Since both parties hold to their own stories and both are under heavy suspicion, guards, take Yun Xinshuang into custody as well. Dispatch men immediately to search the South City Inn for physical evidence." The bailiffs pounced like wolves and tigers, dragging away the wailing and howling Yun Xinshuang. I sat quietly in my place, taking a sip of the cold tea at my side. In my past life, they had forced me to surrender the iron metal, making me bear their infamy for eternity before they conspired to torture me to death. In this life, I haven't even lifted a finger, yet they have turned on each other to save their own skins, personally delivering one another to a dead end. At that very moment, I suddenly felt a highly piercing gaze land upon me. I looked up and met the deep, dark eyes of Hui Yuan, who sat in the presiding seat. He was watching me, a faint, almost imperceptible trace of scrutiny seemingly flickering in the depths of his eyes. I met his gaze without flinching, nodding slightly with a calm and magnanimous demeanor. This spectacle of dog eats dog had only just reached its climax. The night Yun Xinshuang was escorted to the women's prison, no one in the general's mansion slept a wink. Mrs. Liu was like a headless fly, frantically digging out all the gold, silver, and valuables from her courtyard in an attempt to bribe her way through the court of judicial review. However, this murder case was now being personally overseen by the emperor, with Chief Justice Hui Yuan presiding over the trial, and the disciples of old Master Qi exerting pressure from the outside. Who would dare to accept bribes at such a critical juncture? Mrs. Liu pleaded with everyone she could find and ran herself ragged, yet she couldn't even manage to cross the threshold of the court of judicial review. Taking advantage of the moment when Mrs. Liu was distracted and overwhelmed with anxiety, I summoned my trusted confidant, Nanny Wang. Take this letter and this coiled dragon jade pendant, avoid all prying eyes, and deliver them personally into the hands of my maternal grandfather, Grand Secretary Shin. I sealed the letter on the desk with wax and handed it over carefully. In my past life, I was deliberately deceived by Mrs. Liu, always believing that my birth mother's family looked down on me for being a motherless eldest daughter, which led me to treat the Shin family with extreme coldness. It wasn't until I was in the woodshed on the verge of death that I learned my grandfather, Grand Secretary Shin, had secretly sent people to provide for me many times, only to be harshly rejected by Mrs. Liu in my name. The Shin family, a household of noble and upright scholars, saw me hurting those close to me and gladdening my enemies, and thus their hearts gradually grew cold, leading them to sever all ties. Now that the Liu mother and daughter are mired in scandal, my strength alone might be enough to reclaim the dowry, but it would be difficult to prevent a backlash from the Liu clan and the influence she has cultivated in the capital over the years. I must leverage the Shin family's prestige among the pure-stream civil officials to firmly nail the charges of murder for financial gain onto the Liu women, ensuring they never have a chance to stage a comeback. 2 days later, in a private room at the Ruifu Tea House in the south of the city. This tea house was one of the properties from my biological mother's dowry, which I had just reclaimed yesterday from Liu's maternal nephew using thunderous tactics. I was flipping through the reply and shop handover documents secretly sent by my uncle from the Shin family when the door was slowly pushed open by a pair of long, powerful hands. The visitor was not in official uniform, wearing only a crow-blue casual robe, yet he still could not conceal the cold, murderous aura tempered in mountains of corpses and seas of blood. It was the chief of the Court of Judicial Review, Hui Yuan. A slight shiver ran through me, but I kept my expression unreadable. I calmly slid the document under the paperweight, rose, and performed a formal curtsy. Lord Hua, instead of presiding over cases at the Yamen, what brings you to a common tea house in the marketplace? Hui Yuan seated himself without being invited. His deep gaze pierced through the rising steam of the tea, settling directly on my face. Miss Yun, this move of yours, using an opponent's strength against them, has truly been an eye-opener for me. I'm afraid I don't understand what you mean, my lord. I lowered my eyes and poured him a cup of Junshan silver needle tea. The evidence he Qinyan hid in the inn's second classroom has already been seized by my men. However, By a stroke of luck, the pawnshop manager and several servants from the manor who were under life contracts were taken under the protection of an unknown force 2 days before the incident. Hui Yuan's well-defined fingers tapped lightly on the table, his voice low and heavy with pressure. Had it not been for that, the assassin sent by Lady Lu would have likely succeeded long ago. Miss Yun, this foresight of yours is a bit too remarkable, wouldn't you say? My hand holding the teacup paused for a fraction of a second before I nonchalantly passed the tea to him. This man was indeed terrifyingly sharp. I had secretly borrowed the Shin family's men to protect the witnesses, thinking I had executed it flawlessly. Yet he had still managed to follow the trail and detect a clue. Lord Hua, your cases rely on ironclad evidence. I met his piercing gaze, a faint smile playing on my lips as I looked back at him candidly. I am but a weak woman who has spent her life in the inner chambers. How could I possibly possess the gift of foresight? I simply knew my stepmother has always been ruthless and feared her missteps might implicate the Yun family. To protect myself, I merely placed a few lookouts around my late mother's old shops in advance. As for why those witnesses happened to survive, perhaps it is divine justice. Even the heavens could not bear to see the young grandson of the Qi family die in vain. Hui Yuan narrowed his eyes slightly, staring at me for a long time. It was the look of a hunter scrutinizing his prey, yet it carried a hint of intrigue, as if he had finally met his match. What a fine display of heavenly justice. He let out a soft chuckle, though the mirth never reached his eyes. Since the eldest Miss Yun understands the art of self-preservation so well, you should know that once a chess player enters the game, a single moment of carelessness can lead to total defeat. I thank your lordship for the reminder. I curtsied, my expression calm and composed. What Zhiyi seeks is nothing more than the return of property to its rightful owner and for the wicked to be brought to justice. As long as Lord Hua upholds the law impartially, there will only ever be the king's law on this chessboard, and no personal grievances. Hui Yuan stood up, looking down at me as his slender fingers straightened his cuffs. Grand Secretary Shin already paid a visit to old Mr. Qi early this morning. The final trial at the Court of Judicial Review is in 3 days. I hope Miss Yun's testimony will be as airtight then as it was today. It wasn't until Hui Yuan's figure had completely disappeared around the corner of the stairs that I realized my palms were coated in a thin layer of cold sweat. This lone wolf, who held the power of life and death in his hands, had clearly seen through the secret alliance between the Shin family and myself. Yet, he did not expose it. Instead, his words carried a hint of tacit approval. The enemy of an enemy is a friend. Hui Yuan intended to use this case to purge the culture of factionalism within the imperial court, while I sought revenge. Our paths were different, but our goals converged. The case of the wrongful death of old Master Qi's young grandson finally reached the ears of the emperor. The Qi family had been a lineage of integrity for 3 generations, with former students and subordinates spread throughout the government. Dozens of petitions flew into the imperial study like snowflakes. The emperor was incensed. He threw the petitions down in open court and ordered Hui Yuan, the minister of the Court of Judicial Review, to investigate the case thoroughly, showing no leniency. At the height of this storm, a crucial piece of evidence appeared on Hui Yuan's desk: secret letters and bank drafts proving that Lady Lu had covertly bribed underworld thugs in an attempt to intercept and kill the pawnshop appraiser and the servants from the villa outside the city. Naturally, I sent it over by taking advantage of the secret channels belonging to my maternal grandfather's family, the Shin clan. In my previous life, Madame Lu used this very tactic of drawing the firewood from under the cauldron to silence all witnesses. Ultimately, she forced me to produce the Yun family's iron certificate of immunity, forcibly washing away Yun Xinchuang's murder charge and rebranding it as accidental killing. Now, having lived a second life, I have not only secured the witnesses but will also turn her attempt to destroy evidence into a guillotine hanging over her neck. As expected, once the evidence was presented, the emperor was incensed. He immediately rebuked the general's mansion for lax household management, indulging a daughter's violence, and the crime of harboring a criminal. Had it not been for my father's illustrious military achievements during his lifetime, this single charge of contempt for the law would have been enough to send Madame Lu to the imperial prison. Even so, officials from the Court of Judicial Review cordially sealed off 2 side gates of the general's mansion that very night, strictly forbidding anyone from entering or leaving at will. Mrs. Lu was now completely thrown into a panic. In a fit of overwhelming anxiety and rage, she collapsed straight onto the courtyard floor, falling unconscious. Upon waking, she remained bedridden and lingering in illness, unable to even utter a coherent sentence. Meanwhile, I sat in the study, unfolding a secret letter sent by my maternal grandfather via express courier. On the stationery, Grand Secretary Shen's handwriting was vigorous and powerful, reflecting the character of one who had weathered 3 imperial reigns. To my granddaughter Zhiyi, I write this as if we were meeting in person. The years of silence between us were truly due to the deceptions of treacherous people. Now that I know of your difficult circumstances, know that while the Shen family does not meddle in military power, we will never allow our own flesh and blood to be bullied. Regarding the matters in the capital, you may proceed with a free hand. Your grandfather and your uncles shall be your most steadfast supporters. At the bottom of the envelope, there was also a bronze private seal of the Shen family, along with the red deeds to 8 flourishing shops in the capital, private assets specifically allocated to me by my uncles. Fearing I might lack ready cash, as my fingertips brushed against the cold seal, a burning heat welled up in my eyes, and the last trace of hesitation in my heart vanished. With the thunderous support of my maternal grandfather's family, it was finally time to bring this operation to a close. The following morning, I ordered a grand armchair to be brought out and sat composed in the center of the general's estate's main hall. Below the steps, a dense crowd of people knelt across the courtyard. From the inner courtyard's managing wives and accountants to the outer courtyard's purchasers and gatekeepers, even Lu's hand-picked confidants, all had been pinned down by my core servant women and the several guards lent to me by the Shen family. Eldest Miss, what is the meaning of this? The madam is still ill. If word gets out that you are causing such a massive commotion, I fear you will be branded with the crime of being unfilial. Steward Wang, who had come with Lu as part of her dowry, stiffened his neck and attempted to use filial piety to suppress me. Unfilial? I let out a soft laugh and slammed a thick ledger directly into his face. Your mistress embezzled my biological mother's dowry for her private use and conspired with thugs in an attempt to silence me. Now, even the seals of the Court of Judicial Review are plastered across the lintel of the general's mansion. As the eldest daughter of the Yun family, if I continued to let a pack of wicked servants like you follow her lead and run amok, that would be true unfilial piety toward my father in the afterlife. I stood up, my gaze sweeping over the crowd like a cold blade, my voice icy and lethal. From this day forward, I am taking full control of the general's mansion's household affairs. Hand over the keys to the accounting room and the warehouse tallies immediately. Furthermore, anyone who has helped Lady Lu sell off my mother's dowry or handled illicit accounts over the past 2 years, step forward now. If I have to root you out one by one, it won't be as simple as being sold off. I'll have you bound and sent straight to the Court of Judicial Review to keep the second young lady company. As soon as these words were spoken, the area fell into a deathly silence. Who didn't know that the Court of Judicial Review was currently a living hell? The second young lady had only been in for a few days, and word was that 2 of her fingernails had already been crushed. Within moments, the accountants began shaking like chaff, surrendering all their keys and ledgers. Several managers prostrated themselves, knocking their heads against the ground like garlic pestles, spilling everything they knew about Lady Lu's embezzlement of the estates and her withholding of servants. Wages like beans pouring out of a bamboo tube. Nanny Wang. I sat back down in the grand armchair, picking up my teacup and skimming the foam off the surface. Take the account books to the madam's courtyard. Tell her the 3-day deadline is up. If the dowry is still incomplete, I shall take the Shen family's calling card and invite the governor of Jingzhou to pay a visit. If she wants to maintain any shred of dignity, she had better cough up every single land deed and property title from her private storehouse. Under these thunderous tactics, the chaos within the general's mansion was suppressed with an iron fist within half a day. Watching the chests of curios and antiques being carried back from Lady Lu's courtyard to my own storehouse, I let out a long, slow breath of relief. The tides in the general's mansion have finally turned. And as for that pair of dogs biting at each other in the celestial prison, it is time for them to meet their final end. The final verdict from the Court of Judicial Review was delivered with remarkable speed. Qi Qingyun was sentenced to execution after the autumn equinox. Yun Xinshuang was stripped of her status as a noble lady and granted a length of white silk to commit suicide. Lady Lu, for her involvement in harboring a criminal and hiring an assassin, was stripped of her titled lady status, sentenced to 50 strokes of the cane, and exiled 3,000 miles. The day after the verdict was finalized, I shed my ornate jewelry and finery, changing into a simple, elegant moon-white skirt, carrying a sandalwood box and presenting a memorial from my grandfather, Grand Secretary Shin. I requested an imperial audience. Inside the imperial study, the curling smoke of ambergris incense rose slowly, yet it could not mask the heavy, oppressive aura of imperial majesty. The current emperor sat upon the dragon throne, the seat of supreme power, leafing through the case files submitted by Huiyuan, the minister of the Court of Judicial Review. Hearing the sound of my kowtow, he did not look up, merely speaking in a cool tone. Lady Yun, the verdict has already been passed. You seek an audience today in plain mourning clothes. Do you believe Huiyuan's sentencing was too harsh, and have come to plead for mercy for your stepmother and stepsister? This humble daughter would not dare. My forehead pressed against the cold gold-leafed bricks. Though my voice was soft, there was not a hint of retreat. I did not enter the palace today to plead for mercy, but to confess my crimes. The emperor's fingers, which had been flipping through the case files, paused slightly. He finally lifted his gaze, scrutinizing me with a sharp look. And what crimes have you committed? As the eldest daughter of the Yun family, I failed to advise my stepmother to adhere to a woman's virtues and failed to guide my younger sister in restraining her conduct. This led them to commit the heinous crime of treating human life like grass, harming the innocent and bringing shame upon my late father's illustrious name. This is the crime of failing to maintain order within one's household. I cannot atone for it even with 10,000 deaths. My words were earnest as I remained prostrate on the ground. The imperial study fell into a heavy silence, save for the faint sound of the hourglass. After a long while, the emperor let out a cold snort. You certainly take all the blame upon yourself. Do you realize that based solely on the fact that your stepmother hired assassins to silence witnesses, I could hold your entire family accountable by association? Thunder and rain, dew and frost, all are the emperor's grace. However, I have come today to return one final item to your majesty. I straightened my back and held the red sandalwood box I had been cradling high above my head, slowly opening it. Resting quietly inside was the Danshu Tai Quan, the Iron Certificate of Immunity, a token of absolute pardon granted to only 3 meritorious officials of different surnames since the founding of the Great Qian dynasty. Upon seeing this object, the emperor's gaze shifted instantly. His original aura of intimidation transformed into an unfathomable, dark glint. In my past life, the Lady Lu had used the threat of her own death and the moral weight of filial piety to force me into using this iron certificate at the Court of Judicial Review to save Yun Xinchuang's life. But she did not understand that no monarch can tolerate the existence of such a privilege that bypasses imperial authority right beside his throne. That time, though I saved Lu and her daughter, I completely exhausted the last shred of the emperor's affection and trust for the Yun family, ultimately triggering the subsequent catastrophe of our family's execution and seizure of property. Today, I will never again keep this death warrant. This is the iron certificate bestowed upon your father by the late emperor. The emperor's voice softened slightly, yet it carried a hint of testing. You brought it here. Do you intend to use it to offset the crimes of the Yun family? Your majesty is wise. I met the monarch's gaze, my eyes clear and candid. My late father spent his life on the battlefield. This certificate is the reward from your majesty and the late emperor for the loyal souls of the Yun family. However, merit is merit, and fault is fault. If I were to use this certificate, earned with my father's blood, to shield a villain who treats human life like grass, that would be a true defilement of my father's heroic spirit and a trampling of the laws of Dakian. The Yun family shall never use the name of loyalty to commit the evil of concealment. I kowtowed deeply, every word resonating with strength. I know I lack the virtue to preserve such a sacred object, and I am willing to return the iron certificate to the imperial court. I only beg your majesty to see clearly that the guilt should not extend to married daughters or the innocent. The Yun family's integrity has never been tainted by association with such villains. These words were a strategic retreat, but even more so, a complete bearing of my soul. I was using this iron certificate, which the emperor had long dreaded, to trade for the total eradication of his suspicions that the Yun family was hoarding military power or growing arrogant from their achievements. The emperor stared at me for a long time, long enough that I could hear my own heart beating like a drum. Finally, the wariness in his eyes dissipated entirely, replaced by a smile of genuine appreciation. Well said, not to use the name of loyalty and martyrdom to shield evil. Zhiyi, you truly possess the unyielding character and integrity your father had back then. The emperor closed the dossier and stood up. Your father sacrificed his life for the country. How could I allow a loyal minister's lineage to end? And how could I vent my anger on you just because of a few vicious women? Li Fu Hai, convey my decree. The emperor turned to the head eunuch, his voice both majestic and gentle. Yun Zhiyi, daughter of the late general of agile cavalry Yun Hui, is profoundly sensible and has placed justice above family ties, embodying her father's spirit. By special exception, she is hereby granted the title of County Magistrate of Qingbing, bestowed a private residence, and an estate of 500 households. No one shall ever again criticize her based on the crimes of the Liu family. This humble subject bows in gratitude for your majesty's profound grace. Long live the emperor! Long live the emperor! I kowtowed with trembling limbs, tears finally streaming down my face. This was not just the joy of being granted a new lease on life, but the relief of completely washing away the humiliations of my past life. It was high noon when I stepped out of the palace gates. The warm winter sun spilled over me, dispelling all traces of chill. I looked back at the towering red walls and golden tiles, letting out a long, heavy breath of turbid air. Yun Xin Shuang, Qi Qin Yun, Lady Lu. Everything you inflicted upon me in my previous life, I have now repaid it all, with interest. From this moment forward, I, Yun Zhiyi, shall live only for myself. The corridor of the imperial prison was dark and deep, with the torches flickering on the walls making a faint crackling sound. Before the eunuch could enter the cell with the bestowed white silk for her suicide, I presented my token and stepped into the death row cell where Yun Xinchuan was held for the final time. In just a few short days, the second young lady, who once acted with such arrogance and overbearing tyranny in the general's mansion, was now curled up like a heap of rotting mud in the damp straw. Her hair was disheveled, her prison uniform was stained with dark red blood and grime, and her fingers were twisted and scabbed from the torture of the finger-crushing racks. Never again able to play the jiaowei zither she once took such pride in. Hearing the sound of footsteps, Yun Xinchuang sluggishly raised her head. When she clearly saw the formal red palace attire I wore, a symbol of my status as the county mistress of Qingbing under the dim firelight, her entire body shuddered violently, and her eyes erupted with extreme disbelief and malice. Yun Zhiyi, it's you. You're the one who ruined me. She struggled to lunge forward, only to be jerked back to the ground by her heavy shackles. She could only gasp for air violently, like a dying fish. I did it so cleanly. If you hadn't meddled in my business, the one dead would be that little chi brat, and Healing and I would have long since fled to safety. Fled to safety? I looked down at her, my gaze devoid of joy or sorrow, as if looking at a pile of dry bones. You think He Qingyun truly admired you? When the Court of Judicial Review interrogated him, in order to lighten his own sentence, he didn't hesitate to push all the murderous ideas onto you. He said you were driven by jealous hatred and that he was coerced by you. Your dear lover personally pressed his thumbprint onto your confession. Impossible. Healing would never do that to me. Yun Xinchuang's pupils shrank sharply as she let out a shrill, piercing scream, tears mixing with filth to smear across her face. I ignored her frenzy, merely leaning down slightly to whisper in a voice only the two of us could hear. In our past life, when you brought that bowl of poison to me in the woodshed, you held that same air of superiority. You said I was as stupid as a pig and deserved to be trampled underfoot by you and your mother. Now, how does this taste? Yun Xinchuang's screams came to a screeching halt. She stared at me with wide, bulging eyes as if she were seeing a vengeful ghost. Her lips trembled violently, but she could no longer utter a single word. I straightened up, smoothed out a non-existent wrinkle on my sleeve, and turned to walk out of the cell. Behind me, the eunuch had already stepped through the door carrying that tray of snow-white death warrants. Piercing sobs echoed through the corridor, eventually fading into a deathly silence. Stepping out of the dungeon, it was just past noon. The sunlight outside was brilliant, and the marketplace was bustling with life. My carriage did not hurry back to the newly built County Princess Manor, but instead took a detour to the 10-mile pavilion outside the city gates. Today was the day my stepmother, Lady Lu, was to set off for exile. I sat in the carriage parked by the official road, lifting half of the curtain. Not far away, 2 escorting bailiffs were brandishing their whips, urging the prisoners forward. That coarse woman, staggering under the weight of a heavy wooden cane, was my once illustrious stepmother who had prided herself on being the matriarch of a noble house. The 50 strokes of the cane had left her flesh torn and bloody, before her wounds could even heal. She was forced into shackles for this long trek. Her once well-maintained face was now as haggard as an old crone's, and every step she took was accompanied by a wail of agony. With her broken body, I feared she would not even make it halfway through the 3,000-mile journey to exile before turning into anonymous bleached bones by the roadside. Suddenly, Lady Lu seemed to sense something. She turned her head with great effort, and her clouded gaze happened to collide with my cold stare from within the carriage. She opened her mouth, appearing as if she wanted to beg for mercy, or perhaps to hurl curses. But in the end, only a few hoarse, grating, and broken sounds escaped from those shriveled lips. The bailiff's whip cracked harshly across her back. She let out a wretched scream and tumbled miserably into the dust, no longer able to maintain even a shred of her former dignity. I calmly lowered the carriage curtain, shutting out all the biting wind and bitter rain outside. "Mistress, shall we return to the manor?" Outside the carriage window, Nanny Wang asked respectfully for instructions. "Let's head back." I picked up the hot tea from the small table and took a gentle sip. The fragrance of the tea overflowed, refreshing my heart and soul. As for He Qing-yun, who has been sentenced to execution after autumn, he will endure the torment of fear day after day in the death row cell until the autumn wind rises and he is decapitated at the vegetable market execution grounds. He is no longer worth a single shred of my attention. The carriage drove steadily into the inner city, heading toward my brand new manor. In this game, I, Zhiyi, have won a complete and total victory, having lived a second life. I have not only personally severed the ill-fated ties of my past existence but will also live out my own magnificent and glorious life under this bright and clear sky. The story has come to an end. Thank you for listening. Please feel free to subscribe, like, share, and comment. Thank you.